I have been doing mental health work for 38 years. Now, when I think about that, it is a bit astounding that I've been in the field in one way or another for that long. But I started at a very young age knowing that I wanted to be a psychologist. What I wish I would have known way back then, though, was the whole idea of the dark night of the soul. I probably had two or three of my own dark nights of the soul before I understood or even heard the terms. And so I want to help you understand from a mental health perspective what a dark night of the soul is, but also how instrumental it can be to understand it from a soul perspective, because it really does help facilitate your understanding of why crappy stuff happens sometimes and why it is that we feel so bad at times. And, personally, I wish more practitioners knew the term because they could help the people they serve understand the process a lot more instead of thinking they're in some, well, they are in a deep depression a lot of times, but thinking that it's a deep, desolate, dark depression without ever understanding the greater meaning for it. So, St. John of the Cross, way back in the 1500s, mid to late 1500s, coined the term. And he had gone through his own turmoil. So his father died at a very young age. I think he was 3 or 4 years old. His brother died not too long after that. And so he was brought up in a very desolate family. He was brought up in a, obviously way back then when your parent dies, who was probably, quote, the breadwinner, you don't have much to look forward to. And he and his family went into a very deep poverty. And so he later went into basically a religious school and went in to become someone who served the church. And as he as he learned, I'm going to tell you this part of the story too. As he learned more and more about serving through the religious order, he also started realizing he didn't agree with all of it. And so he kind of was a reformer of the church. He started a group that basically was a new thought for the order. And because of that, he was imprisoned and he was basically, told everything he was doing was wrong. And so you can imagine, even back then, 1500s, that had to have been just debilitating in so many ways, emotionally, spiritually, all of these things. And so what happened for him is while he was imprisoned, he started contemplating what had been happening to him, contemplating how desolate he felt and how desperate and depressed he felt and how dismayed and betrayed by the world that he felt. And so his idea of who he was crumbled. His idea of the world as he knew it crumbled. He had no hope. He had no interest. From what the reports are, basically, he was just in this very, very, quote, dark place. And because he was who he was, meaning he was a reformer, he was one of those kind of innovative disruptors, as they say. I've been called one of those too. It's the whole idea of he started putting two and two together to start forming thoughts on what all of it meant for him to be going through this, to the point that it helped him cope to write about the dark night of the soul. So he used his own lived experience to help other people understand this term that now has been around for centuries. And so the dark night of the soul is when something happens in such a big way that pretty much everything you perceive to be true or real or good in the world seems to crumble. And so it's an identity shifter, it's a world shifter, it's a consciousness shifter, it's a belief shifter, it's all of these things that just crumble all at once. So for those of you who have had a deep depression, think about how you felt. Depression is one of those things that it does change how you see the world. And whether it is a realistic perception of the world or not, that is your perception. That is your experience of the world. So everything feels like it crumbles. Everything about your identity crumbles. Everything about the world as you know it crumbles. Everything that I mentioned a little bit earlier about what St. John of the Cross felt, that is what happens during a major depressive episode. And as a psychologist, I wish I knew, let me rephrase that. As a psychologist who does soul healing work, I wish I knew way back when I was in training how to help people get through these times from a more meaningful perspective. Because just like St. John of the Cross, if you can start to look at those dark nights of the soul, when you do have depression, when you do have major episodes of whatever emotional kind of turmoil that you have, that leave you feeling desolate, if you could apply meaning to that as quickly as possible to help you understand it, it's going to get you out of it. And this is one of the reasons why I do spiritual psychology, because I know that doing soul work accelerates the process of healing. I know that helping people understand concepts related to the soul, including dark night of the soul, I know it helps people accelerate their process. I just had a client today, today, who I've worked with for several years because she has a long family history of depression. She has her own depression. She questioned up until recently whether or not her depression was real, because she had so many dynamics playing on her from some childhood abuse and some other kinds of things that were going on that she would question herself. She now believes she has depression. But she told me today that had she not understood the soul as she's going through this next phase of her treatment, this next phase of understanding her past and releasing the past so she can heal, she said, I would not be able to be where I'm at. I would not be able to go through this process now. And I agreed with her. I agreed with her, and I said, I know that this is a unique way of looking at life to integrate the soul into the work that we do. But she said, I couldn't be where I'm at without it. And she's functioning at such a different level than that she was when I first saw her, 15, 16 years ago, because she came into my office and I literally spent almost every session what I would call scraping her off the couch. What I mean by that is that, when people are in that desolate place, they can barely make it to your office. They can barely even breathe, let alone do any of the processing and the work and the healing. And so after many years of getting her on the right medications and then reevaluating that, and also her going through several bouts of depression, and every time we get her a little higher, a little higher, a little higher, she's finally able to see that the soul is an integral part of her work. And had she not had this perspective, she would not be where she's at. So we did have a conversation about that. So the reason I want to bring this to the world right now and bring this, out to, this series that I do, this video series, I call it the Soul of Psychology series. The psyche and the soul are not the same thing, even though in my undergraduate education it was taught as the same thing. It is not the same thing. The psyche is everything that is cognitive, everything that we think. But the soul is basically everything we are. So it is the body, the mind, and the soul. It's the energetic essence of who we are. It's everything that is stored in our body, from our traumas, from our emotions, from any experience we have, as well as what is stored in our brains because of what if we have been programmed to think, what have we've been programmed to believe, all those kinds of things. But our soul encapsulates all of that. And so if we don't look at the soul as part of healing, we are missing out on the biggest part of the healing process. And so, I'm going to preach this left and right. I'm going to keep going there, that learning the soul terminology, learning things like what is a dark night of the soul. And I would encourage anybody to go look at the history and go read his essay, the St. John of the Cross. Go read his essays and his poems on the dark night of the soul. You're going to understand it. You're going to resonate with it if you've ever had one of those bouts in life when you just feel like you're scraping yourself off the pavement. Understanding soul language will get you so much further with your emotional healing. It'll get you further with your physical healing. And, this is how, again, I keep talking about bringing ancient wisdom to the modern soul. The reason that I say ancient wisdom is that around the same time that basically St. John of the Cross was talking about this, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, was also forming the field of medicine and saying that every organ is part of the soul. Every illness is part of the soul. And so way back, the historic figures in our history, our healing history, believed the soul was part of who we are, but it is absolutely left out. You will not hear about it in medical school. You will not hear it in most psychological programs. I never heard about the soul in my psychological program. I went off and started reading on my own and creating my own soul health model. So it's a wellness model to help you understand how the soul is present in everything. And then obviously my whole soul model, which is coming out with the certifications that I'm using to teach other practitioners. But think about this. If you have had a challenging time in your life where you felt that sense of being desolate, hopeless, helpless, nothing has, remained the same, really any of that, you will understand and you will resonate with the whole concept of the dark night of the soul. I would look into other soul concepts because there's so many things like I'll do different videos on this, but things like soul contracts. This explains so much about the challenging relationships we are in or have had, which could be part of our dark nights of the soul, whether it's through a breakup or a loss of someone. We can go into a dark night of the soul from any given aspect of the human condition or situation or circumstance of the human condition. So this video is really to kind of initiate that whole idea that if you have ever had a a diagnosis of a major depressive disorder and you look at that event and you look at what caused that event and then you go read a little bit about the dark night of the soul, you're going to understand how, yes, your psyche and your emotions were very much involved in this, but that you're going to be able to understand it from a higher level because you're going to be able to understand the concept of, oh my gosh, this is an existential experience that I had that goes beyond my emotional state at the time. And if you realize that it was there to help expand your view and help you get out of that place and help you, what I call evolve beyond the situations of those circumstances, it is going to give you a firmer grounding on how to get out of it in the future. It's going to also, if you start to feel that way in the future, it will help you stay out of one of those similar experiences. So again, I cannot emphasize the importance of bringing the soul back into healthcare, bringing the soul into mental health care. I think about the history of the medical world and again, way back to the 1400s, 1500s, when the medical field was really starting to form and the ideas about what the body does and how to fix it, even though a lot of those things are a little scary now that you look at them, that was in the 1500s. It was a long, long time ago. When we think about the field of psychology, it is a very new field. It's only about 160, 170 years old, really. We need to bring the soul back. And so concepts like the dark night of the soul will help you get there. I'm going to add a link to some of the information about the dark night of the soul into the information, but I just want you to think about, from a mental health perspective, if you are a practitioner, what is it that you could do to integrate psychological information with, I should say integrate and interweave psychological information with soul information? If you are a person who has been through mental health kinds of concerns, maybe learning more about the soul is going to be your ticket out of those mental health concerns. Just some thoughts, just some nudges, bring that soul back. Again, I would love to hear your own stories if you're willing to share them. And, this is all about helping expand our view. So again, bringing ancient wisdom to the modern soul. Hope you have a wonderful day and ask any questions that you might have. Bye-bye.